I'm joined now by the co-founder of March for Our Lives, David Hogg. David, thanks so much for joining.
Thanks so much for having me.
So you have an announcement here. I wanted to give you the floor and let us know what you have to say.
Yeah, after many conversations with people and being pushed by a number of my friends and allies, I'm announcing my run for vice chair of the DNC, which is a role that a decision I did not make lightly. This is not something you do because it's fun. Let me tell you, it's because it's necessary. Like all things in life, the most important things to do are rarely the easiest. And I'm somebody who has not always been very let's say, consistently publicly supportive of every decision that the Democratic Party has made. But I'm not here just to criticize it. I want to build something better. And I want to live in a reality where we acknowledge the fact that we actually lost, right? The most frustrating thing to me, to be honest with you, and I want to apologize for sounding angry in this. It's because I am angry. We raised $2 billion, much of it coming from small dollar donors, and the general sense, and this is not directed towards any one person, it's a broader cultural problem I think we have within the party.
Yeah.
General sense that I've gotten after the election is, well, guys, we might have said that Donald Trump is a huge threat to democracy, that he's a fascist and other things like that. And that was obviously what, the general vibe was before the election. But it's okay. We tried our best. And the reality is you don't say that. You don't have that mentality, right? We choose to consistently live in our own safe little bubble and in a comfortable reality instead of an uncomfortable one where we could actually win. And instead of actively choosing just to listen to people, it's the reason we lost this election, it was ours to win. The reason why we lost is because we did not listen. And in fact, we paid consultants to not only help us, not only did we put our fingers on our ears and say, la, 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 your inflation is not that bad. Rent's going up is not that bad. Crime is not that bad because look at these charts, look at these stats. Instead, what we did is we paid consultants to push our fingers so far into our heads that it tickled our brains, to drown out these things. And what we need to do as a party is actively choose to live in an uncomfortable reality, to listen to the people who don't agree with us at times, especially within the party, and have an open conversation. It's not to say that we can make everybody happy. Let's have no, I have no delusions about that. But the reality is we have to listen to those that are raising serious concerns about key constituencies. During the DNC, I was on the National Finance Committee as one of the youngest people for the Harris campaign on the National Finance Committee. And in that room at the Chicago Art Museum that we were at, I raised the question of what are we doing about young men? And the amount of vitriol that I heard back of saying, why would you ask that question? That's, such a dumb thing to be focused on. We don't need to focus on that, is emblematic of the broader problem at hand. And that I understand as a party, there's a taboo around talking about young men. Because oftentimes that has been to the exclusion of women, obviously. But the reality is we need to have a more nuanced view of it and understanding that empathy is not a zero-sum game. And if we continue to isolate young men, it is actually going to be worse for everybody, including women. The other thing, too, is that when I raised concerns over a year before Election Day about young voters, I heard from those same consultants that we pay to, stuff our fingers in our ears even further, that young voters were not something we needed to worry about, that I was dumb for even thinking about this, and that everything was going to be fine. And then, unfortunately, I was proven correct with the election. And I hope that other constituencies were going to make up for it. And that would help bring us across the finish line. And that just didn't end up being the case, in part because our answer to voters was not to listen to their feelings. It was to tell them how to feel.
Well, David, there's obviously, I think, like the elephant in the room in terms of Democratic leadership is that this party is largely a gerontocracy. I mean, we have for a party that claims the majority of support, not enough, but the majority of support among young people, the fact that we have such an old leadership class, I think is a major cause for concern here, and probably the reason why there is so little ability to relate to the issues plaguing regular people, whether it's housing costs, whether it's just regular costs of living. So how do you plan on navigating what is going to be an environment that's hostile to young people? You're in your mid-20s. So how do you plan to navigate this environment that is inherently hostile to young people, that's shown it's hostile to young people in light of your run for vice chair of the DNC?
I mean, to be honest with you, it's not easy. This is one of the toughest things that I've done, because you're not, it's one thing to be questioned and criticized by Republicans. It's another thing to be questioned by the people that are on your side. Right. I know why I'm in this. I did not choose to be involved in Democratic politics. I was forced into it because of the fact that we don't have a choice of whether or not to make our kids safe in our schools. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I know that if I don't do this, there are few other people of my age that actually could, that can have the voice, that can raise the money, that can get into those rooms and can speak out. And I need to make sure that I'm working to open that door and keeping it open for other young people into the future. And with that too, realizing that I'm the underdog in this race, but I'm not going to try to contort myself and say, well, I'm going to twist myself in all these different ways to try to earn your vote and all these other things. But the reality is we need some serious changes. And I think anybody that can't see that is part of the problem. And I understand that may cost me votes, but I would much rather tell people what I am actually feeling than feed them bullshit talking points over and over and over again that are part of the reason why we've got here. I'm not scripted. Sometimes that's a disadvantage, but the reality is at least you know what I'm feeling and you know why I'm in it. It's because of what we saw yesterday in Wisconsin. It's because of what we see every day in our country. In my own, where I live, right? I know the stats. I know that gun violence has come down. I know that it's gone down by over 10% in the past 4 years. But the reality is, in my own neighborhood, there have been, in the past 6 months, 2 drive-by shootings that happened, right? And carjackings that have happened, and cars being dropped off after they were carjacked. I know the stats, but I know that the answer to somebody to my neighbor is not to say, no, you don't understand. That drive-by shooting that woke up, your partner at 2 a.m. the other night wasn't that bad because crime's actually down 10%. What we need to do is bring people in that are working outside of the Beltway. I'm traveling constantly to the work I'm doing with Leaders We Deserve to elect more young people, knocking doors, not in blue states, not just in blue states, not just in purple states, but in states as red as Alabama, where our first race was, where I was knocking doors in Birmingham, Alabama, right? Not easy conversations to have, but those are the conversations we need to, because we can either choose to continue to live as increasingly the party of the consulting class or become the party of the working class by actually listening to people. And it's not to say that I'm perfect or that, frankly, that I know every single thing and how to fix it perfectly. I'd be lying to you if I said that I did, but the reality is I know how to listen. And I think that's half the battle right now.
I think that's such an important point that you made about basically pointing to statistics as some type of a substitute for people's lived experiences and saying, well, okay, there is no problem with crime because it's down 10%. It's like, well, that's not going to change the fact that what I'm seeing with my own eyes when I see a carjacking, for example, it shows me that there is. But I think there is an over-reliance in the Democratic Party on saying, look, things are fine. And I'm guilty of it too, by pointing to these macroeconomic figures and, okay, CPI is within the target 3% range, as if that makes it easier for anybody to be able to afford something at the grocery store that they simply can't afford. And I think that does exacerbate the gap in terms of how regular people and the Democratic Party and politicians and even folks like me in the media are able to connect with each other. And that is the disconnect right there. I view your age and your lived experience as a strength. Do you, by virtue of the fact that you're not completely swallowed up, subsumed by the Democratic Party machine or Beltway media, I view it as a strength. Do you think that in this race, your age and your lived experience are going to be viewed as a strength versus a liability? And if not, how do you convince people that it should be?
I think part of it is people need to speak out publicly. The delegates need to see that the Democratic electorate supports me, right? There are 448 members of the DNC that can vote on this position for DNC vice chair. And I need people to speak out publicly about supporting me in this mission, supporting me in this role, because this disruption is not going to come from the inside a lot of the time. What we need to do too is make sure that, I want to go back to the question that you said earlier too about like how we're a gerontocracy. I think to some extent that is certainly true. Obviously, I have eyes, and I've been in these rooms, and I'm often the youngest person in there by a decade plus. I do think that we need experience, though. I think that we can, and it's possible for me both to be critical of the party, but also give credit where credit is due. I think the DNC was one of the best, events that I have ever been to. But the reality is our job isn't just to throw an amazing party. Our job is to win as a party, right? Our job is not to tell voters how to feel. It is to listen to voters about how they feel and meet them where they're at. And I think my age in this case in particular, in some ways it's an advantage because I don't need to contort myself, and I have not put myself in a box to say, well, I really want to get this consulting job, so I'm gonna contort myself so I can go and work for this presidential campaign or this congressional race. I don't care about that. I care about winning. I care about making a difference and making sure that people like me in the future don't have to exist because school shootings and gun violence don't happen. And the bigger thing is too, I know right now our party is not in the place that it needs to be on guns. We have made progress. I have to acknowledge that, right? We passed the first gun law in 30 years, and it's potentially saved over 1,000 lives with the number of people that have been prevented from buying guns like the AR-15 since the passage of the Safer Communities Act and the billions of dollars that we put into community safety and violence intervention programs. But the reality at the same time is I know for a fact, if we had 60 votes in the Senate as Democrats, Democratic leadership, not our electorate, to be clear, not the general consensus within the party, but the leadership of the Democratic Party is going to say, well, we actually can't ban assault weapons because we need to be worried about these 10 other seats and we need to do all this other stuff. Instead of going in the philosophy of Governor Tim Walz that I totally agree with, which is that we do not, as a party, we should not be banking political capital just to save it. We are given the honor of serving by the American people to deliver for them, to lower healthcare costs and not give them bullshit talking points, to address the housing crisis in our blue states and cities in something other than a press release a lot of the time. We need to become the party of building. We need to become the party that actually listens when people are telling us that they have these problems. Part of the reason why I'm running for this is because I've lived a lot of the failures of our system, unfortunately. And I am somebody that, even in my position, both my parents are public servants. My mom was a teacher. My dad was an FBI agent and a Navy helicopter pilot and veteran. After the DNC, I had to fly straight back home, not to go and campaign, but to help my dad transfer into hospice with my family. And that was one of the most painful things that I ever had to do because I saw how the system lets down people that have served it the most time and time again. I saw how, my dad, despite serving he was also a teacher on top of all that, despite literally serving his country his entire life, was even on his deathbed still denied the benefits that he was entitled to because of his Parkinson's very likely being caused by his exposure to jet fuel. And seeing how even with his healthcare, even with the hospice that we do pay for, my dad's healthcare, to have a person 12 hours a day in our home to help take care of him was over $19,000 a month. And having to make a spreadsheet of how long you can afford to keep a loved one alive and cared for in the way that they deserve to be is something that no Democrat, no Republican, no American should ever have to do. And we're in a crisis right now. We talk about a gerontocracy within the party. We need to talk about it in the country too. We're in a sandwich moment for our economy and our country where we are in a incoming, the tide has receded and gone out to sea, but it's before the tsunami arrives right now with the massive explosion that we are going to have in elder care costs and increasingly child care costs that are going to cripple our country if we do not build a Democratic Party that actually delivers in something other than its talking points, because it actually has the courage to deliver and understand that we're not elected just to stay elected forever. We're elected to do the right thing and fight for people like my father, fight for people like my classmates, and actually get something done on all the issues that are affecting us.
I think what you said about we are not there to bank political capital for future elections is so spot on. I mean, look, Democrats have lost their majority, and so all of that banked political capital gets you what at this point? Like we're in a position where we're completely in the wilderness, and so every step that we didn't take to make sure that we have a living wage, every step that we didn't take to make sure that we have union legislation, to make sure that we have stronger healthcare, stronger reproductive rights, stronger gun safety, whatever it is just a lost opportunity because at the end of the day, it's all zeroed out anyway, and then you either have power or you don't. And so what's the point of banking political capital for the future if you're not going to actually give people a reason to vote for you the next time because you didn't exercise that power when you had the opportunity?
Exactly. But it's even more than that because we did deliver on a lot of great stuff. And that's part of what kills me. We did do good stuff, whether it was the most climate spending in human history, right? The first gun law in 30 years, the creation of the Office of Gun Violence Prevention that survivors have been pushing for years to create. And an office that was literally coordinating the federal, state, and local government's response to basically every mass shooting that they could, going on the ground, talking to survivors and getting them the support that they need, not from some obscure office in the DOJ or a different government agency, but directly from the president of the United States. So that when there was a shooting, for example, in Lewiston, Maine, they were on the ground there talking to them about, okay, there were a lot of people in this shooting that were deaf or hard of hearing. How do we get them ASL interpreters so that they can get the therapy and support that they need and deserve to build a government that actually delivers for the people? And it wasn't in a partisan way. They worked across the aisle with Republicans, Democrats, and independents across Maine to help do that. But we need to be able to talk about what we are actually doing. At the same time, we also need to simplify our policies. I think that's one of the biggest obstacles that we have is we overcomplicate everything. We treat so much of our communication like this is a graduate student seminar at Georgetown or something like that, when what we need to be treating it as is we're having a conversation with our neighbor about the fact that he's having to take care of his mom who's, elderly and having to handle all the healthcare costs. And you know what we say to them is, we don't want to have a system where you go bankrupt because you want your mom to have the best healthcare, period. It's not complicated. We want to have a system, in my opinion, where veterans are, the onus is not on our disabled veterans to prove to our government why they are disabled and how that's service connected. The onus is on the very government that sent them to the war in the first place to actually talk about why their why their disability is not service connected, rather than the veteran that has already sacrificed so much. Because if we're willing to spend so much money going into bullshit wars like Iraq, for example, and doing that, we should at least take care of our veterans afterwards. And when I'm out there, when I saw the work that was being done on the PACT Act, that Republicans sunk at the last second, right? Just out of spite for veterans like my father and Democrats. When there are people, veterans that I am friends with, that were sleeping outside of the Capitol, pulling a fire watch on the steps of the United States Senate until they pass that legislation, those are the real Americans that we need to be talking to and empowering in the party and listening to. Right? Because we did deliver for them, but we need to communicate better that we did that in the first place.
David, talk to me about what people who are watching right now can do to help, and also what the structure is of the DNC vice chair spot. If I'm not mistaken, there are 5 DNC vice chairs. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, and so how many people are running right now, and what's the best way for people who are watching and listening to be able to help you make your case?
So I don't want to get into too many of the specifics of the logistics of the election, because I don't want people to just turn this off. But basically there's a gender balance, and it's very likely there's only going to be one seat available for a guy for vice chair right now.
Okay.
And the best way that people can support me, the election's coming up in just over a month or so from now. But the best way people can support me is tweeting out that they support me, talking about it, posting about it, and tagging people that are delegates for the DNC. And the first ones that I can tell you about are your state party Democratic chairs and vice chairs as well. And also, I'm still very new to this, and I've tried to do as much of the homework as I can, but the DNC is at times a bit obscure and a little hard to understand. But nonetheless, the best thing that I can have is that public support out there from you all, because it really just comes down to those 400 some odd people. And they need to know that the people that are not just the party insiders and other people, but normal people, support my run for this. And because I am the underdog. The reality is, like I said, because I am not scripted, because I'm not trying to contort myself and not lie to people, but just manipulate the truth that I'm saying to people about why I'm doing this, but just being completely open with them about, I think it would be a good idea if, God forbid, we had a massive shift of 20 points to the right of 18 to 29-year-olds. Hear me out. Maybe we should have somebody of that age demographic in the room.
Yeah.
Just
well. It's exactly the right point. And I think, look, I think your passion is undeniable. And I think, and you hit on so many of the right points here in terms of what Democrats need to do, especially from a messaging perspective, being able to just communicate with people in a way that regular people can understand and appreciate. And that's something that we've lost thus far, and that we need to get back. And we need to get it back with a certain subset of the population that I think you can relate to a hell of a lot better than the vast majority of people out there. So best of luck on the rest of your run here, and I'm sure we'll be talking before the elections actually happen.
Thanks so much. Let's go win this thing.